All right, everyone, welcome to Biblio.com, used and rare book marketplace featuring over 100 million used, rare, and out-of-print books. In celebration of our Biblio.live Virtual Book Fair, we're going to be doing a series featuring some book collectors and their amazing collections. First up is going to be Stacy Shirk. Now, Stacy holds a BFA in drama and English literature and an MA in literature with a concentration on folklore and popular culture, both from NYU. These days, she works as a book and research consultant for HBO and HBO Max. She has over 200 books in her collection of culturally significant fairy tales that we wish we could spend the entire day discussing. Stacy, thank you so much for joining us.
Of course, thank you for having me.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your collection?
Yes, as you mentioned, I primarily collect fairy tales, which includes classics like the works of the Brothers Grimm and Hans Christian Andersen, as well as fairy tales from many countries and cultures that are not necessarily as well known to a typical Western audience, you could say. I also collect ephemera, such as a women's magazine cover from the early 1900s featuring a Bluebeard illustration. I collect some fairy tale artwork, like a lithograph of an Ivan Bilibin illustration from Vasilisa the Beautiful. And I have various fairy tale inspired items, like some clothing from Dolce & Gabbana's fairy tale collection in 2016. So sort of wide ranging, but all about fairy tales.
Wow, that sounds incredible. And it sounds like you've spent quite a time amassing your collection. Okay. Now, you mentioned in previous interviews, you had already owned several books from yours and your mother's childhood. Can you tell us a little bit more about what inspired you to begin purposefully collecting these books?
Yes, I've always loved fairy tales, as well as mythology and folklore, generally speaking, which is part of why I still have all of those books from my childhood, and part of why, my mom passed on those books to me, because she obviously also loved all of those things. And so when I discovered the rare book trade, fairy tales really seemed the right direction for me to go in, because I just have such a love for and fascination with the genre. And I've always appreciated the ubiquity and the breadth of fairy tales, because they're found all over the world, pretty much in every culture. And they're crucial stories because they're some of the first ones that children are really exposed to. And you could say they help form the bedrock of our storytelling tradition.
Absolutely. And just having a huge influence on our society in general, hitting those kids with that cultural influence in their formative years. That's an incredible observation, to be going back to those stories as adults and rereading them and, examining their influence. You've collected all these books, arts, ephemera, etc. What is the most surprising tidbit about your collection theme you've learned while talking to booksellers?
This probably should not have been surprising, but it's something that has kind of taken me aback as I've continued to encounter this issue. Really interested in finding the authentic stories from, whatever culture the stories are coming from. And so many of the fairy tales that I initially collected from, countries that had been colonized had obviously gone through a white colonialist lens. And so you see many intros in these books where you have the translators, compilers saying, oh, these stories come from, primitive cultures, things like that. And, oh, we've changed certain elements to be more appropriate for the audience back home. And these things that really are not what you look for when trying to find stories from a culture, because obviously then it's not really the authentic story. And so one thing that I've discovered is that I really need to look for books that are being published now, as well as books that were published in, the late 19th century, early 20th century, which is when you get a lot of those books, because there are so many scholars and translators now who are doing that work and going back to the basics and finding those stories and translating them more accurately. And so it's really paying attention to current releases in the current marketplace, as well as, looking to the more antiquarian books.
That's crazy to think about too, is that we're getting all these filtered versions of these age-old stories that had been passed down forever. And so I think that's really good work as finding and like restoring the original like cultural significance to these stories. That must be like an incredible thing to continue learning. Are you actively adding to your collection, and how are you currently sourcing your collection items?
Yes, I'm definitely currently actively adding to the collection. I can't stop.
I'm just going to squeeze another question in there. What are you currently on the hunt for right now?
Gosh, sort of what I have mentioned is, more authentic stories from around the globe. I'm always trying to find, variations as well. There's thousands of versions of Little Red Riding Hood that come from all over the world. And so I'm always trying to find variety. One of my favorite things is comparing, these stories from around the world, the newer retellings as well. So there's such a variety in what I'm looking for. I would not say that there's like any one specific thing, because the best thing about my collection for me has been the aspect of discovery and finding these new stories that maybe I didn't necessarily know existed, and finding these retellings that say something about where we're at right now. One of my favorite recent publications is a book called Cinderella is Dead. And it's about a society where Cinderella was a real person, and it's 200 years after she lived, and her story has been integrated into the way this community lives and their values. And it's actually been twisted into a really harmful way to control the women in the society. And it's fascinating seeing how somebody has taken this classic Cinderella story and imagined what it could do to a society, because a story like Cinderella has been incredibly important even in our real life society. And so it's just, seeing the way these stories continue to change and have always been changing is really what I'm always looking for.
Yeah, and that's crazy. You're going to have to send me the details on that afterwards, because I can imagine like this author did not have to stretch her imagination that far to come up with like the societal impact of that story. Wild. So back to the original question, how are you currently sourcing your collection items?
How am I currently sourcing? So many different ways. I would say I find most of my books online. And, often that's through Biblio, through books, through booksellers' websites. There's some booksellers that I have a relationship with, and so they'll send me the things that they really love and think could be right for my collection. And so often it's through email too.
Yeah.
And then also through book fairs. I mean, it's been so exciting to get to go to in-person book fairs again. I'm also working with a collections advisor. His name is Spencer Stewart. I just started working with him as part of the prize for the California Young Collectors Prize. He's helped introduce me to auctions as well, and other booksellers that I may not have known already. So yes, basically every possible way.
Holy cow! Yeah, you have developed
everywhere.
Quite a network and ways to source that. That's incredible. Now to my favorite part, show and tell. What is the most exciting piece you've discovered at an in-person or virtual book fair?
Okay, hold on. It's actually behind me. So one second.
Let's see it.
This is the Blue Fairy book. And there's a light, but it's a first edition of Andrew Lang's Blue Fairy book, which is incredibly hard to find. Here, one second. And I saw it actually. It was at Rare Books LA. It was their first fair. And they had posted on their Instagram story this book, and it was at Caroliniana Books. And I was like about to leave for the fair, and I saw the Instagram story, and I was like, "Oh my God!" I have to go get that. And so I drove over immediately. And I it was like a beeline straight for Caroliniana Books. And I was like, I saw that you had this book. Do you still have it? And they did. And it's here, you can see, It's
Oh, wow.
incredibly,
Beautiful.
it's incredibly difficult to find in, any sort of collectible condition. So I was just absolutely thrilled to find this book. So yeah, it's the most fun. It was the most exciting for me personally, but I found so many great books at book fairs.
That's incredible. Yeah, it looks like a beautiful copy. You've got it nice and protected. So,
Thank you.
pass down that legacy of your incredible collection. Stacy, thank you so much for sharing with us today. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I can't wait to see more from you. Anything else you'd like to tell the audience today? If they want to follow you or learn more about you, where can they find you?
Oh, well, I was interviewed for Fine Books and Collections, and so you can read a little bit more about my collection there if you're interested, and you can probably catch me at book fairs coming up. I'm very excited.
Hopefully, we'll see you at the next fair. Thank you so much,
Yes,
Stacy.
of course. Thank you.